I enlisted because at the time, I think when I graduated high school, we didn't really, my family, you know, my mother didn't go to college. No one at the time went to college and didn't really know a lot about college. But I did know that I wanted to get out of Chicago because I had a really bad experience with law enforcement. I was either 11, 12 years old in Chicago, and really wanted a challenge. I would always hear that, hey, the Marines were the best of the best, and I felt like sometimes I guess I just need to challenge myself because I wasn't really challenging myself, you know, after high school. You fly from Chicago, you fly to San Diego, okay? So Marine Corps Recruit Depot is in San Diego. It's actually next to the airport. We didn't know that at the time because when we got there, the drill instructors, they put us on a bus and we drove around. We had to put our head in our laps, had to close our eyes, and we drove around for about 40 minutes. Just left turns, right turns and stuff. Had no idea the depot was right next to the airport. I guess it was to disorient us. So the first day, you have all of these different stories about, hey, you don't want to be the last person off the bus because your drill instructor is going to yell at you, and you don't want to be yelled at the first time. And so I remember there was a mad dash. It was one of those things. So when the bus stopped and they said, get off the bus, and everyone made a mad dash to get off the bus because you didn't want to be the last one on the bus, because we were all told stories that they're going to really yell at you if you're the last person off the bus. And I remember just kind of like popping out of a window or something, and I just did not want to be the last person off the bus. So day-to-day life was up in the morning before the sun. I remember reveille, drill instructors slamming garbage cans, just really, really loud. I talk a lot, and you have to be disciplined to stand in formation and like not talk or not look around, because that was me, and I always got in trouble because of that. That I think that was the worst part, especially because I knew how to impersonate the drill instructors, and I would always impersonate the drill instructors and I'd always get in trouble. But then I think secretly the drill instructors loved it because they were like, yeah, he's got him down pat. You know, it was just kind of really cool.
I imagine you're all wondering why you're here. Why you're going to be trained as military policemen. And maybe you don't like the idea of policing your fellow soldiers. Well, for one thing, policing your fellow soldier is mostly helping him to stay out of trouble. First of all, you're going to become soldiers yourself with 8 weeks of rough, tough infantry basic training. And then you're going to get 8 weeks of training in the duties and techniques of being a military policeman. And when you're through, you're going to find yourself among the best trained, best uniformed, sharpest soldiers in the United States.
And we also did a lot of military, just police tactics, handcuffing, shooting, how to talk to people, and de-escalation training, you know, things of that nature. So you go through basic training, and they train you and they teach you how to be just a basically trained Marine with no military occupational specialties, such as like military police or admin. So you have to go to a secondary school. So when you exit basic training, we all go to either Marine combat training. That's for people who aren't going into infantry. So Marines who don't go into infantry, and these are the grunts, these are the people that we always see fighting. So that's infantry. So if you don't go into that occupational field, you go to Marine combat training. So with Marine combat training, it's a 3-week course on military tactics, but that's not your occupational specialty. So after your 3 weeks at Marine combat training, you go to where I went, was at Fort McClellan, Alabama, in Anniston, Alabama, for military police school. I went to Japan April 21st, 1997. No, the trip, you don't know what to expect. You know, you're just like, man, you're excited, but then at the same time, you're like, I don't know what to expect.
Iwakuni, Japan is also known as the gateway to Korea, being the closest military airfield in Japan to the Korean demilitarized zone. 21 miles away from Iwakuni is Hiroshima, the home of the infamous atomic bomb. Before it was a Marine base, Iwakuni was farmland until 1938, when the Japanese government bought the land in hopes to create a naval air station. During World War II, the Iwakuni Air Station was used as a training and defense base. In May and August of 1945, the Marifu Rail Yard, which held the oil refinery and rail transport stations in Iwakuni, was bombed with American B-29s. These air raids on Iwakuni lasted until the day before World War II was brought to a close. It would take American Marines, the first to reach Iwakuni, with signed papers to end the conflict at the Japanese air base.
When we arrived in Japan, it was Marine Corps. It was just like America. Well, the base was, you know, because all your creature comforts that you had at home, you had on the base. But once you went outside the gate, it was a totally different world, different culture and everything. And I was one of those who, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. You know, you don't go to Japan and look to do American things or things that you would do in America. So we started doing things that they did out in Japan. You know, I learned the language. We'd go fishing. We'd go up into the mountains. I even went snowboarding, and I'd never gone snowboarding before because the mountains were... The one thing about being over in Japan is it's, you know, you have that barrier, the language barrier. But at that time, I think I was learning the language, and you're immersed in it. I mean, everyone around you speaks Japanese. Most of the TV shows, it's all Japanese. Once you go out into town, you have, you know, the streets are in Japanese, but then some streets were in English. Just a lot of times people were really amazed and surprised to see you, especially being African American. They're not used to seeing black people over in Japan. What is it, 95% of the population over there is Japanese. You have some Caucasians over there, but it was, you know, I think it was a culture shock for them too, to see black Americans over there because they never encountered us before. They would try to communicate with us. Some would want to touch you. You had to tell them, don't touch me, and they're curious, but you don't touch people. It's just one of those things, but they would. But I think after a while, they, you know, especially in that area close, like Iwakuni was the city that our base was in, so they were used to seeing us, and then even Hiroshima, you know, for that matter. But the further you got away from base, the further you were away from base, it was culture shock because no one spoke English. And they were surprised to see you, and you know, some people would scurry away from you, wouldn't want to deal with you because they didn't know you, and they were just surprised. It's what fear of the unknown, I would say. Went through the ranks, and I picked up some rank, and I was a little senior than some other Marines. I was able to actually patrol and answer calls on base, you know, just police calls, like arguments between husband and wife or roommates, and you know, someone stole something over here or someone broke into a car over there. We would actually investigate these crimes on base. Last day over, I remember it because we had a party inside the flight line because we had an airline, or it's an air station, so we had a flight line. But I knew a lot of the people who worked in air control and who worked the flight line. And at the time, they were like, man, we're really going to miss you. So we had a party at the airport. Essentially, it was the airport. No one knew what was going on. Like, people constantly rotate in and out of the country. But for one section, there was just so many people over there. And they were like, dude, we're going to miss you. I was like, I'm going to miss everybody, you know, too. Well, we had a party. And I was like, man, I don't know if I want to go now. Like, who has a party at the airport? But apparently it was me. And I think it was a good time. I was looking at getting out, and if I wanted to make contacts and try to position myself to get out and to get a better job while I was exiting the Marine Corps, I needed to be stateside because of the time difference, and I'm trying to call someone. It's night in Japan, it's daytime there, and then I may miss a call because during working hours on over here, I'm sleep over there. So it was one of those things. So I ended up I was stationed down in I got orders to Albany, Georgia. So I was down in Albany, Georgia for 3 years. What I take away from my military service were the lifelong friendships. People I was stationed with in Japan 20 years ago, I still text almost every day today. Even though I don't talk to them on the phone as often, but when we do, we pick up from where we left off at, even if it was 2 or 3 years ago. Just lifelong friendships that, I mean, they only get stronger, through the years. And it's not, I guess that's what I would say, is that I remember that most of all.
You know what I want from the police?
What's that?
I want the police to protect life and property in my neighborhood, and that's all. If you do that, then you'll cover everything else.
I've seen them twice, twice that I can remember, ride through the street. But never once have I seen them walk through the street. Never once.
They don't seem to let you get along with them,
And they still calling us niggas, man.
A real man.
Did you know that you wanted to continue on in law enforcement?
Yes. I guess to backtrack, the reason why I even wanted to go into law enforcement is because I had a really bad experience with law enforcement. Just I was either 11, 12 years old in Chicago, and I remember we used to call them the jump out boys. So these were the guys that drove around in unmarked cars and stuff like that, and we used to call them the jump out boys because they would jump out on some of the gang bangers, drug dealers around our neighborhood. And I remember just walking down the street, and I remember, there was 4 white police officers, jump out boys, and they were in a car. And I remember they pulled up, and one of them was like, "Hey, nigga, you getting ready to go rob somebody? You getting ready to go sell some drugs?" And I remember I was like 12. You can't say anything because at the time in Chicago, they would, law enforcement, and no one knows about this, but law enforcement at the time they would throw you in a car and take you to a rival gang territory and drop you off. You'd have to run home or try to get back home without getting your butt kicked by a different gang or whatnot. But just being 12 years old, you're being respectful. I didn't say anything. I was just like, like that's kind of messed up. But I remember not really being mad at that one particular officer. I think I was more upset that the other guys didn't do anything, that they just sat there and they laughed like it was okay. I remember a couple weeks after that, I was really upset, but I didn't say anything. But I remember a couple weeks after that, I remember seeing that one of those officers, the one who called me a nigger, and I remember seeing him shaking down one of the guys in front of our neighborhood, in front of our apartment building. And I don't ever remember thinking like, oh, what did that guy do? I just remember like, oh, there's that police officer fucking with people. And I could see like just a change in me and in what we see today too, even being out there, being in law enforcement where people's, that's their reality, right? That this is what they see. Like, hey, they don't see the police as, you know, doing their job and protecting them. They see us as, hey, some occupying force, or hey, there they are messing with someone. Because I remember thinking that, and this guy could have been a killer. He could have been the worst drug dealer in the world. I didn't look at him that way. I looked at the officer as, there he is, fucking with people. Because I remember he did it to me. I didn't do anything. I was a straight A student, and I was just minding my own business. And they came to me, you know, bothering me with that. And of course, I didn't say anything, but I remember thinking like, man, if I was ever a police officer, I'd do it better. And I'd like to think that I've done it better. I think the biggest difference is, see, when you're in the military, you know everyone. It's a base. And even if you commit a crime on a military base, there's always ways to get to you. If I knew, hey, Lance Corporal so-and-so committed this particular crime, and we can't find Lance Corporal so-and-so, all I have to do is go to someone in his command, his officer of the day or a staff, you know, non-commissioned officer of the day, and say, hey, we need to get Lance Corporal so-and-so down here by 5. By 5 o'clock, Lance Corporal, whoever, is down there, and you're talking to him. You didn't have to go and search for people. You didn't have to put out like, hey, we're looking for this person, or we're scouring the countryside for this person. No, you get them over into our office right now, and they will go and they get them, because it's the military. It's the chain of command. You know, we're so used to following orders that even if we went and did something really, really bad, if I called you and told you, get over here at such and such time, they would go. It would be, you know, here it's totally different, where you're hunting, you're searching for people all the time. So it was a little easier in that aspect. But we didn't see much violent crime on military bases. You know, even though there's weapons all over the place, we didn't see a lot of violent crime because people tend to know, like, what was important. You've got your family on the base, and you don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize their livelihood. So even some of those guys who would get themselves in trouble, it wouldn't be anything serious. It would be, you know, a theft. They would steal something. They might break something, and after they broke something, they're like, I'm really, really sorry. And then they'd offer even to pay for it. But here it's, you know, I can't say that in the military I really learned to just talk to people. You know, just talk to people, and you'll realize, like, that you can get most of your information. And if you learn and you master that art of talking to people, you can talk people down from anything. If they're having a bad day, yeah, everyone has a bad day, but if you continue to talk to them, you can talk them down off any ledge of whatever they're going through. So I think that was the one thing that I brought back from the military when I came and transitioned over to civilian law enforcement. I was a talker. I could talk to anyone, and people remembered you for it. So if you haven't had any future dealings with them, they would remember. Like, hey, wait a minute. I remember him. Yeah, he wasn't doing anything. He talked to me the other day. I'll definitely talk to him, even if they'd done something wrong. So that's what I remember. And I think that was it was an advantage, you know, being in military police and then transitioning over to civilian police. And I think it's important that people see police and law enforcement not only when, like, times are bad, also when times are good, you know. And I'm not some tree hugger where I believe that, hey, oh, you know, I know no one ever calls the police when things are going good, right? They call the police when they're not equipped to handle whatever it is that they're facing at that time, and they need help, sure. But I think it's good that people see police not only during, like, crises. I always say, your personality dictates. I was always that kind of laid back. I can always kind of talk people into or out of whatever. Okay. Some things work for some officers. I remember in Japan we had a corporal who he yelled all the time. As a military police officer, he yelled at everybody. It worked for him, but that style didn't really work for me. So you just always have to yell. I mean, I could talk to you and get the same desired outcome as yelling. So if yelling works, it works, but if it doesn't, find out what works for you. I always thought that, hey, just going out there and treating people decently, it just works. I explain a lot to people. I can tell you, coming from the black community, sometimes we just want to know what's going on. I mean, we're not troublemakers, and a lot of times we just want to know. So you give us that information. I remember being in the military, as a military police, like, we never told anybody anything. And like, hey, someone's calling, wanting to know about this. I don't tell them anything. And, that just curiosity piques, right? Like, everyone wants to know. And sometimes if you explain to people what's going on, they're fine with it. And they'll let you continue to do whatever it was that you were doing. Just let them know. And a lot of times that's what it was. I'd go out and I'd let them know if we were out fighting people, chasing somebody, get into a fight. Sometimes you get the whole community out and they're yelling at us and stuff. But if you tell a couple people exactly why we were out there and why we did what we did, they are fine with it. Especially if, hey, this guy was shooting a gun over here by these kids. He threw the gun by the kids. Well, you can't do that. As long as you tell people what's going on, you can win them over. You can win over even the angry mob. You can win them over by giving them the information, just giving them the knowledge and letting them know. So that was the one thing. I didn't change my personality. I joke with people out there. Even if I fought with people, I still, joke with them, like, hey, how's everything going, even after the fact. And I think a lot of times they remember that, because later on they'll remember, like, man, I remember I got into a fight with that officer, but he was good to go. He was nice. Like, I was actually sorry that I had to fight with him. And sometimes people tell us that. They're like, man, officer, man, I'm sorry I even fought with you. And you're a really cool guy. I'm sorry I fought with you. I don't know what I was thinking. No problem. I don't hold grudges. And that's what I tell them. I'm like, hey, man, it's a game. That's how I look at it. Their job is to get away from the police. It's my job to kind of catch them. It's a game. Sometimes they get away. I can't catch everybody, and they won't get away forever. So that's how it is. Now, I get and I understand where the protesters, are coming from, and also understand where law enforcement always thinks, we believe that it's our job to maintain peace. And, but, if you're on the other side of that line and people say, we just really want to be left alone. I mean, we want to be left alone and we want to get the bad people off the streets. But if you're doing and getting the bad people off the streets, you're alienating the good people, then we've done something wrong. So we have to find that balance to policing, that we're able to get the bad people off the streets and we're able to reduce a lot of the crime, but also fortifying those relationships that we're building in those neighborhoods. So that if I can get rid of this bad person or this person who's not bringing any equity to the neighborhood, but also lift someone from that neighborhood up, because I don't want to take this guy away and then have someone else negative fill that void. But if we can lift that neighborhood up, I think we'd be better for it.
Before I did this doc, I was apprehensive because James isn't a war vet, And I felt like a lot of my peers and a lot of people in the class before me had war veterans. And I was confused on how I was going to create this documentary. But I managed to pull through, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I'm happy that I got to take a look at a different side of being in the military. I think that a lot of the things that James went through being in the Marines and into his work life now went hand in hand. And I feel like when we do like the typical war veteran stories, you don't really get to see how their life in the service correlated to how they live their life today. And I'm really glad I got to show that through this documentary, being how, you know, he was a military police officer and now he is a detective. So he's kind of been in this field for, this is, you know, kind of been his only job he's ever had, is being in law enforcement. And I also was glad that I got to take a look at how racism played a part into this story. He went from growing up being called a racial slur and deciding, this is it, I want to change the way that people think and the way that police do things, and he decided to get in law enforcement. So he goes to being called a racial slur, then he goes to Japan where he's among Japanese people and he sticks out. Then he comes back home, and then he has to face discrimination within the community, and he has to try to find a balance between being a black man and being a black police officer. They're not all here to harm you. They're not all here to be this scary force. They're just humans too. They have lives, they have families, they are mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters. It's okay to like police officers. I feel like trends, especially with people my age, it's always F the police, or that's not necessary. I mean, yeah, like I said, everyone isn't a good person. But just because the police are doing their job doesn't mean that you should say F the police or that they're bad people. Your parents have jobs, your siblings have jobs, your family members have jobs. They're just doing their job.
Okay, so I went to Japan April 21st to, 1997. Man, I just dated myself. So I know it was a week after my niece was born. She was born April 14th. April 21st, I went on a plane, headed to Japan. I had never been outside the country. I take that back. We snuck down to Tijuana, Mexico when we graduated boot camp. We weren't supposed to do that. Don't tell anybody I did.